All right, this is your final review for your grade 8 fractions, decimals, and percents test. We have a 9-question little quiz here. All of the questions will be applicable on your final test, so we'll go through them one at a time and see how well you do. If you want to try these right now, just press pause, try the questions, and then fast forward to the part that you did, and you see if you're right. First question asks us to solve mentally 5.5% of 300. So if this was a question on your test, 5.5%, I would first probably want you to say, well, 10% is 30. And we get that because we just moved the decimal one place over to get 30, right? And if you know 10%, 5% is half of that, so 5% would be 15. 1%, if we move it 2 places, would be 3. And therefore, if 1% is 3, then a half a percent is half of 1%, it would be 1.5. Now, if we think about what is 5.5%, well, it would be a 5% plus a half a percent. So if we combine 15 with 1.5, we would have your final answer of 16.5. For 0.2%, the first thing you want to do is figure out what 0.1% is. Now, 1/10 of a percent, you move the decimal not once, that's 10%, 1%, and 1/10 of a percent. So 1/10 of a percent would be 0.8, and therefore 2/10 of a percent, which is what we're looking for, would be double that, or 1.6. So our answer for that one is 1.6. And finally, our last one, 125% is 60. 100% is, of course, 60. 50% is 30. And half of 50% is 25%, which is 15. And the two we need to utilize to get 125% is 100% and 25%, which means our final answer is 75. Question 2 says, what calculation would be used for this? Remember, when we're talking about 5.5%, we're talking about 5.5 out of 100, which of course is a fraction with a decimal. We don't want that, so we're going to multiply both numerator and denominator by 10 because we want to move it one space over to get rid of the decimal. And 55,000, this would be 0.055. So as a decimal, 5.5% is 0.55, and therefore 5.5% would be 0.055 of 300. That would be the calculation you would use to figure out the answer. Since 0.2% is 0.2 out of 100, has a decimal in the numerator, I'm going to multiply by 10 to get 2 out of 1,000, which is 0.002, or 2,000ths. So therefore, 0.002 times 800 would be the calculation we would use to get that. And finally, 125% is 125 out of 100, which is 1 2500ths, which is 1.25. And therefore, 125% as a decimal is this, of, always is multiplication, 60. Those would be the three answers right there for this particular question. 1, 2, 3. Our next question asks us to draw these. It says 12.5%. So if I was to start with a hundreds grid, and I was to color in 12 of them, I'm going to shade them in. There's 10 of them shaded in. There's 12 of them shaded in. I know this is not perfect, but you have to bear with me. 12 of them shaded in. And this 13th one, which I'm going to circle here and magnify over here, that square, if I was to draw it kind of as good as I can, I'm going to shade in half of it. But over here, I'm going to physically draw just a little bit better and shade in half. So that would be 12 of the 100 squares shaded in, and a half, so that would be 12.5% of the entire cube shaded in. For your next one, I have 1/4%. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take my highlighter, I'm going to just kind of shade in a little bit of this one here, and then I'm going to circle it and bring it over here, and I'm going to magnify that 1% because that square really represents 1%. And if I shade in 1/4 of it, and there's various ways you could do it, you could shade it in differently. You could have it that way, or you could have it that way, or you could have it this way. But no matter which way you express it, it is showing 1/4 of 1%. So 1/4% looks like that. And finally, your last question, 110%. If I was to think of it, I need to first think about what 100% looks like. And I'm going to shade in all of this for 100%. And then the extra 10% is just one line here, and that would be 110%. The next question, say true or false. 0.75% is greater than. Remember, if it's eating what you said, you say greater than. If it's not eating what you said, you say less than. So 0.75% is greater than 0.7, and the answer for this is false, because 0.75% is less than 1%, or if you wanted to say it's 0.75%, either way. And 0.7 is actually equal to 70%. And since 0.75% is less than 70%, then we have to say it's false. The next question says 120% is greater than 100. The answer for this is false as well, because 120% is equal to 120 over 100, which is equal to 1 and 20 hundredths, or 1.2. And since 1.2 is not greater than, I wonder if I can do is not, let's do that, is not greater than, I don't even know that's a symbol, but we're going to make it one, is not greater than 100, the answer has to be false, because 1.2 is significantly less than 100. And finally, our last true false says 1/5% is equal to 0.2%. The answer for this is true. True. And the reason why is 1/5% is the same thing. So if I was to think about 1/5%, if I was to shade in this box, this was one of those magnified squares that we were doing just before, that'd be 1/5. And 1/5 is actually equal to 0.2, because as a fraction, 1/5% is equal to 0.2%, which is equal to 0.2%. Your next question is your table. It says fraction, decimals, and percents. The first one says 51 over 200. What is that as a decimal? So there's two ways you can do it. The first way without a calculator is to simply change it into an equivalent fraction that has a 10, 100, or 1,000 as a denominator. In this case, I'm pretty sure I can make it into an equivalent fraction out of 1,000 by multiplying both the numerator and denominator by 5, which would give you 255 if you multiplied it by 5. Sorry, 220, 225, 230. That's my bad. I can't do math. Good thing I teach it. 230 over 1,000, which would therefore be 230 thousandths, right? And since that 0 isn't necessary, we can just erase it. Now, if you couldn't do that, the other way of doing it is to simply take your numerator. If I grab my calculator here, your numerator being 51, dividing it by the denominator, and you would get the same answer of 0. Did I make a mistake? Oh, I did too. Sugar cubes. All right, let's go back and change it. I guess I can't do math. What is it, 51 200ths? Yeah. Yeah, look at that. I can't do math. Well, hopefully no one's watching this video and it's not embarrassing. It would be 0.255. See, if you tell me tomorrow that, oh my God, Mr. McDowell, that was embarrassing, then I know you watched the video. And what this is as a percent, if I think about 255 over 1,000, as an equivalent fraction over 100, it would be 25.5, and therefore 25.5%. Or if you want to get fancy, 25.5%. Our next question gives us 0.005, and all you have to do to change it to a fraction is be able to read that as 5 tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 5 thousandths. And Bob's your uncle, you have your decimal. And as a percent, you're going to need an equivalent fraction out of 100, which is 0.5, and therefore your answer as a percent is 0.5%, or if you want to be fancy again, just straight up 0.5%. And 125.5%, since I'm given the percentage, and all percentages are fractions out of 100, I could just put the numerator as 125.5 over 100, or 1,255 over 1,000, as an equivalent fraction that doesn't have a decimal in the numerator, or 1 and 255 thousandths, the mixed variety of it. And once I write it as the mixed variety of 1 and 255 thousandths, I can say 1 and is usually interpreted as a decimal, 255 thousandths. And finally, the last one, 3 over 11. You can't make it into an equivalent fraction of 10, 100, or 1,000, so the easiest way to do it is take your numerator and divide it by your denominator, and you get this repeating decimal, 0.272727. So if I write that as a decimal, it's going to be 0.27 repeating with a bar above it. And the percentage, since it is a repeating decimal, I'm going to have to use an approximately equal to. And if I think about that as 0.272, I can actually keep it to there if I want. I can say it's approximately, 27%. Or if you want to get more accurate, you can say it's approximately 27.3%. But either one is a rounded approximation of what the actual percentage is. Your next question says, how much would a $60 item cost with 3.5% tax? Two ways to do it. The first way you can do it is just say, well, what is 3.5% of $60? So we're going to change this to 0.03. That's 3%. That's 3.5% of 60. And if we did it that way, we'd say, what is 3.5% of 60? And the answer would be 2.1, or in this case, $2.10. Add the $60 to the $2.10, and you would have your final answer of $62.10. That's what it would cost. That's the slow route. That's finding out what the tax is and then adding it on. Another way to say, well, if I was to find 103.5%, the reason why we would do that is if this is the cost of the $60 item, right? This is 100%. This is 100% of the $60 item. Then on to that, we are going to add an additional 3.5%, which means the total will be 103.5% would be what I pay for it. So 103.5% is 100 is multiplying it by 1 and 3.5 cents. So it's just really just adding that 1 over here to calculate the 100% as well. And if I do that, what's 103.5%? Then I would just multiply it as 1.035 times 60, and our answer would be $62.10. Same answer I got the other way. Your second question, or your next question says, how much is a $290 item discounted? 10.1%. So again, I could find out what is 10.1% of $290. So 10% is this. 10.1% is this. So 10.1% of 290. I could probably do it mentally, but we're going to do it with this. 10.1% of 290 is 29.29. Right? And that's what the discount's going to be. So then we take our $290 and subtract our 29.29. That's going to be 71 cents over here. 289. That's going to be a 0. That's going to be a 6. That's going to be a 2. So the answer is going to be $260.71 after the 10.1% discount. But alternatively, if I think of this as being the 100% of the item, if it's discounted 10.1%, that means 10.1% is removed from the entire $290 item. So what percent would we be paying for? We would be paying for 89.9% of the item, because 89.9 plus 10.1 equals 100%. So therefore, instead of actually calculating the tax or the discount and then subtracting it, I can say what is 89.9% of the $290, and that should give me 260.71. So if I grab my calculator, what is 89.9% of 290? The answer is 260.71. Same answer. Write the applicable sentence utilizing percentages. So when would you use this? You would use it if you wanted to say how much tax is there on, if it's 80% tax, that would be one thing, but you wouldn't say that. Because again, if I had this 100% of, this was 600, this represents 600, and I was to remove 20%, I would be left with 80% of 600, or 80% of 600. So what I'm looking for A is something that says, what is the price of a $600 item discounted 20%, right? That would be an appropriate mathematical expression to represent that question, right? What is the price of a $600 item discounted 20%? Question mark. Perfect. For B, because we're doing 1.2, if we think about that rectangle idea again, this represents 340. If it's going to be 1.2, this represents 100%, and the 0.2 would be an additional 20% because that's 1.2. So this would be, what is the price of a $340 item with or increased by 20% tax, or whatever happens to be increased by. And that would be an appropriate sentence for that. And your last question says a town with a population, I'll make it a little bit bigger. A town with a population of 40,000 people decreased by 14% in year one, increased by 5%, 5.5% in year two, and then increased an additional 11% in year three. What's the new population? Now, if you did it the long way, you would take 40,000 and say, what is 14% of this? So you could change it into 14% of 40,000. Use your calculator. 14% of 40,000, and you would get 5,600. Add that on, and you would have 45,600. A little dyslexic. 45,600 people. Now, alternatively, you could have said the 114% because you want to include the 40,000 people in your calculation. And when you did that, 1.14 times 40,000, you would have got your 45,600 without having to do addition, right? You would have got it straight up. So that's after year one. Oh, it decreased. Sugar cubes. All right, ignore everything I just said. That stinks. I can't rewind it either. So if it decreased by 14%, that means I'm paying, or I'm not paying. 86% of the population remains. So 86% of the population of 40,000. Sorry about that, guys. Would be 0.86 times 40,000. After the decrease, you get 34,400. See, it's important that you read before you start writing answers. Good lesson. Then in year two, this 34,400 increased by 5.5%. So if it increased by 5.5%, this is 100% of it. So 105 would be this. 105.5 would be this. So if I multiply this by 101.05, that's all of the population plus an additional 5.5% of, it was 34,400. 34,400 equals 36,292. 36,292. That's the population after year two. And then finally, it increased an additional 11%. So I could calculate 11% of that, or if I multiply it by 1.11, that's all of the 36,292 plus an additional 11% of that population. Take that 36,292, and because of the commutative property, it doesn't matter if I multiply it by 1.1 times 1.11, 1.11. My final answer would be, fraction of people. Approximately 40,284 people remain in that particular community, approximately.